12-year-old black boy stood up from his old economy class seat without asking for permission, ignoring all the scrutiny and sighs from the luxurious passengers in front of him. He rushed straight to the business class, a place where normally children like him would never be allowed to enter. Despite the shouts from the flight attendant, the contempt in the eyes of the people in suits, the boy still steadfastly walked towards the woman sitting there, who was struggling with sudden pain in the middle of the sky journey. In a world where skin color is still an invisible boundary that determines trust and respect, the boy's actions were a strong slap in the face to prejudice, a clear challenge that no words could deny. No one could have imagined that this boy, with his faded shirt and worn canvas shoes, would dare to step into a space that people thought was reserved for the powerful. Why would a child, in such a moment of pressure and uncertainty, dare to do what even the chief flight attendant hesitated to do? The story is not only about an act of courage, but also a profound reflection on how we see each other, through skin color, through status, through invisible barriers that prevent understanding and compassion. Would you dare change the way you look at a child of color for just one moment? Listen to this story, and let it challenge every stereotype you have ever held. Because after you hear it, you will never be able to look at a child of color the same way again. Elijah was sitting by the window, clutching an old tablet with peeling edges and a yellowed screen. The 12-year-old was black, wearing a worn, faded white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His frayed Converse sneakers, soles speckled with dried mud, swung gently as he watched a video on basic first aid, his 8th review material. Every time the plane shook slightly, he looked up and out the window, his gaze unwavering. Beside Elijah sat a middle-aged woman with tanned skin and her hair tied back in an old plaid scarf. It was Aunt Ruth, who had raised Elijah since his mother died. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair, her eyes darting around as if trying to determine whether the other guests were uncomfortable with their presence. Elijah paid no attention, though. He had grown accustomed to it. The eyes, the glances that pierced through him as if he were a scratch in the landscape. In the front business class, a completely different world was unfolding. The seats were covered in ash-gray leather. Wine was already poured into slender crystal glasses, and the atmosphere was as quiet as a 5-star hotel in flight. Claire Walker, a white woman who was 8 months pregnant, was sitting with her head leaning on her husband's shoulder, her hands clasped together on her belly. She was tired, but still tried to keep her composure, as if she were waiting for an important meeting. Next to her was Grant Walker, a billionaire investor and founder of Walker Ventures, with a square face, a straight nose, and eyes so cold that every time he entered the meeting room, his employees would hold their breath. Grant was reading a financial newspaper, flipping through the pages mechanically. On his wrist was a silver Breguet watch worth a year's tuition at Harvard. The light reflected off the watch face, then through his glasses, cold, emotionless. A flight attendant approached and asked something in a low voice, but Grant just nodded, not bothering to look up. The atmosphere on the plane was almost completely silent. There was only the hum of the air conditioner fan, the soft tapping of a laptop keyboard somewhere in the business class, and the whispering of children mixed with the soft tapping of spoons on food trays. Everyone was immersed in their own space, a flight that seemed peaceful like any other, until fate began to change the details. In that last row, no one in business class, and perhaps no one in Elijah's life, would have expected that in just a few minutes, the skinny boy with bright eyes would enter an unexpected moment. A moment that would make the distance between the wide, comfortable seats in business class and the narrow seats next to the toilet in economy no longer the only boundary separating people. Suddenly, Claire's weak cry rang out in the business class cabin, tearing apart the peaceful sleep. She bent over, clutching her stomach, as if the intense pain had just taken all the strength out of her body. Her eyes were tightly closed, her pale face quickly turning pale, each heavy breath hitting the quiet space that was originally filled with only the regular breathing of the passengers. Flight attendant Sandra, a young woman with neatly tied hair and a professional expression, immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. She rushed over, her stern but calm voice echoing in the cabin. "Everyone, please maintain order. Doctors and nurses, please assist immediately." The call sounded like an alarm bell, but it only evoked an eerie silence. Not a single person stood up. Not a single person was ready to step into the emergency role in this tense atmosphere. The eyes in the business class cabin, instead of turning towards Claire, were evasive, glancing at each other and gradually turning away, as if denying responsibility or simply afraid of being entangled in unnamed trouble. Grant Walker, the man standing next to his wife, looked confused for the first time in his life. He hesitantly called out to the flight attendant, "Miss, she's about to faint. Aren't you going to do anything?" His voice was low, mixed with disappointment and anger, as if he had just been betrayed by the whole world. But no response was enough to calm the turmoil in his heart at that moment. Outside the cabin, the numbers on the time display were ticking away, each minute stretching out endlessly. The plane was still hovering in the sky, unable to make an emergency landing because the radio connection to the ground was malfunctioning, preventing the rescue team from immediately intervening. The air was thick, as if every breath of the passengers was being suffocated by helplessness and fear. In the economy class, all eyes were on Claire, but no one stepped forward to help. There were startled whispers mixed with slight shakes of the head. In the business class, the silence became suffocating. Not only the silence of status, but also the silence of prejudice, of social distance and skin color. In that moment, Elijah sat still, his eyes fixed on the woman in pain, feeling the urgency but also understanding the hesitation of those around him. Everything seemed to be waiting for a miracle, or an unexpected action, to break down the invisible wall that separated them. In the moment of deadlock and silence, Elijah suddenly stood up from his chair. The boy, wearing a faded white shirt and worn canvas shoes, walked quickly and resolutely towards the business class cabin, ignoring the suspicious, scrutinizing eyes of the surrounding passengers. The space seemed to freeze. All sounds suddenly fell silent. Only the light but determined footsteps of a boy not yet 13 years old remained. Sandra, the flight attendant, with a worried and somewhat stern expression, quickly blocked his way. Her voice was stern but somewhat urgent. "You are not allowed to come up here. Return to your seat immediately." Elijah was unwavering. His gaze was steady, his words soft but clear as a command. "I know what she's got. I learned. It's preeclampsia." The words carried an understanding beyond his years, a small ray of light in the darkness of despair. Grant, the rich man with a face of both surprise and disbelief, turned to look at the boy with a confused gaze mixed with doubt. "Who are you?" Elijah didn't answer. He gently leaned down next to Claire, placing his hands on her shoulders carefully, as if transmitting strength through his fingers. His voice was soft and guiding. "Lean over here, I'll help you rub your acupoints, and breathe with me." The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, watching the boy's every slow movement. Elijah's small fingers pressed on important acupuncture points one by one, combined with each deep and even breath he guided Claire to take. The curves of her face gradually softened. Her skin was no longer pale to ashen. The beads of sweat on her forehead seemed to prove the boy's relentless efforts. After about 40 seconds, a miraculous change was evident. Claire took a deeper breath, her face became calmer, her eyes became brighter and less anxious. A passenger from the back of the business class cabin couldn't contain his surprise, exclaiming in a voice filled with amazement, "My God, you really did it!" In the still surprised atmosphere, Elijah gently straightened up, his eyes still calm. The boy did not need praise, did not demand recognition, simply a pure act from the heart and learned knowledge, melting the cold wall of prejudice that was separating everyone on this flight. The loudspeaker blared from the cockpit, the captain's voice clear and calm, breaking the tense silence that had enveloped the entire passenger cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an emergency, the flight will be diverted to the nearest airport. An emergency team is on standby to provide immediate assistance." These words were like a gentle breeze blowing through everyone's mind, gradually erasing the tension, but at the same time stirring up a new worry. All eyes turned to Claire, the pregnant woman with a face still covered in sweat, lying half reclining, half sitting on the chair. As the plane touched down softly with the sound of tires hitting the runway, the doors were immediately opened to let the ambulance in. The medical team quickly approached, checking every indicator from blood pressure to heart rate. The team leader looked at Elijah with eyes that could not hide his surprise and admiration. "You helped stabilize her blood pressure in time. If it weren't for you, the situation could have been much more serious," he said, his voice deep and weighty. Sandra stood on the sidelines, still in shock, watching Elijah's small figure as he quietly walked back to his seat in the economy class. She was speechless, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and a little regret. Grant, the man who had looked suspicious and annoyed, now walked closely beside his wife as she got out of the ambulance. He stopped and turned to look at Elijah. His once cold eyes were now soft and respectful, but still not completely free of surprise. He himself, just a few minutes ago, had regarded the boy as a rude person, someone unworthy of attention. But now the image of the boy, with his decisive actions, calm and profound knowledge, was imprinted in his mind like an undeniable reminder. The atmosphere in the cabin was still filled with mixed emotions. A story of prejudice broken not only by words, but by the pure actions of a small child, who lit up in everyone's hearts the hope for justice and kindness. A week after the emergency landing, Elijah walked into Grant Walker's spacious office. A glass-ceilinged building filled with natural light, every modern interior line with pure white and cold metal panels seemed to separate his world from the rich man's. The air there carried an invisible, thick pressure, but Elijah still stood straight, his eyes slightly confused, but did not move away from his position. Grant was waiting, his initial sternness melting as he looked into the boy's eyes. The eyes were no longer filled with suspicion or contempt, but with a deep, unfathomable respect. "You saved my family," he said, his voice as deep and serious as ever. "What do you want? A car? A scholarship? Whatever you want, just say it." The atmosphere seemed to quiet down for a moment. Elijah bowed his head gently. His voice was small but clear, carrying a sincere humility. "I don't need anything, but if you can." He hesitated a bit, then continued, "Give a box of pencils to my class, because we have to share broken pencils." That simple statement, small in the middle of the large conference room, made Grant speechless. He stood still, only nodding slowly as if to agree without any more words. His eyes began to moisten, shining with a quiet emotion that was rarely seen in a powerful man like him. No need for grand gifts, no need for compensation or pompous honors. Just a simple request is enough to soften a seemingly frozen heart. And in that moment, amidst the gentle light reflected through the tall glass, a new bridge between two worlds was quietly formed. A week passed, and the pickup truck slowly rolled down the driveway to Elijah's school, carrying dozens of brand-new pencil cases. Simple gifts with the power to change. Those pencil cases were not just school supplies, but also symbols of a growing hope in each motivated child. The media quickly spread the story of the Elijah's Pen Fund, a scholarship dedicated to disadvantaged children with passion and talent for science. The story of the 12-year-old boy has overcome barriers of prejudice, touched the hearts of millions of people, sowing the seeds of goodness and justice that many people yearn for. In the constant flash of the camera, Grant hugged Elijah, his eyes filled with gratitude and respect, while Claire stood beside him, gently holding the newborn baby, little Eli, as a reminder that life goes on, and each generation can write its own story. The final scene ends with Elijah standing in the middle of the schoolyard, a pen in hand, his eyes fixed on the vast sky ahead, where the future opens up endless possibilities. A curious little classmate asks, "Did you really save someone?" Elijah smiled slightly, his eyes sparkling with undying faith, his voice ringing out like a declaration. "No, I just won't turn my back, like they did to my mother." These words are not only a response, but also an invitation for each of us to have the courage to stand up, look straight at the truth, and not let injustice overshadow the light of compassion.